We've done the ectomorph, the mesomorph.
Yeah.
Now we're on to the endomorph. So the third time lucky here. This is the last one.
Yeah.
So again, caveats at the start of this video, Cameron. These are not sort of discrete categories. People have been banging on in the comments about how the whole thing is like bro science and it's it's useless. These are just words which describe body types in general, right?
But people have been requesting this video.
They have been. It seems like there's a lot of endomorphs out there
Yeah.
who are interested in this.
Yeah.
So look, what is an endomorph? So these are the people that tend to be wide in the waist and hips, and they carry a lot of their excess weight around their middle and their bottom end. So often they'll have fairly sort of slightly built shoulders, but they'll have really wide thighs and quite a wide pelvis, and they carry a fair bit of that sort of visceral fat around their belly, their buttocks and their thighs, and they often find it really hard to shift that weight. So these are the people that have, they often have tried a lot of different diets and stuff, and they always hold their weight around there. And so these, in my experience, they often have like poor circulation in their lower limbs, and they really have a lot of difficulty losing what we call visceral fat around the middle. You'll often see them with things like cellulitis in their legs and things like varicose veins, which are indications of impaired peripheral circulation and lymphatic drainage of the lower limbs. And this is part and parcel of what I would call general metabolic dysfunction. So you can be more genetically prone to this, but you can also just develop it as well through poor lifestyle habits, basically. But metabolic dysfunction, what I mean by that is they often have really, really poorly mediated sleep patterns. They tend to store energy in the form of fat really easily based on poor metabolism in general. Their leptin sensitivity is all out the window. Their insulin sensitivity is all out the window. They often have really poorly regulated eating habits, so they will sort of binge eat sometimes and then go through periods where they go the other way, and they often have really heavy duty carbohydrate cravings.
So you better be careful, Neil. I can feel a few endomorphs leaning into their screens going, this skinny prick telling me what I'm doing wrong.
I apologise. I apologise in advance.
But the video has been requested. Let's just say that again.
It has been requested. Some people need the harsh truth. And sometimes this just comes across as derogatory. But no, this is a really pretty common thing. Especially, I mean, Australia is pretty bad. America is very bad with this sort of stuff due to their poor sort of general mean, what would you call it, mean BMI curves that they have. And a lot of the Western world is really prone to this due to our really highly refined diets and our poorly regulated sleep habits due to social media and everything. So this is a pretty common body type that's becoming probably more and more common based upon modern lifestyle choices, unfortunately. And so you can be more genetically predisposed to be like this as well. But there's always an interplay of that genetics versus environmental sort of reality, and it's neither one nor the other. It's always a bit of both. So if you get a proper endomorph and you do all the right things, they will come back out of it. So it can be environmentally mediated. It is you can never say that it's just my genetics. It doesn't matter what I do. I'm always like this. That's never true, and neither is the other end of the spectrum. It's always an interplay between the two. So in terms of postural stuff on the bike, these people tend to need really, really upright postures on the bike. So we will tend to gravitate them more towards a more upright front end with a shorter stem because they can't bend forwards very well. They get a lot of thigh strike because of the excess weight on the front, and they often don't have really good core strength to cantilever their torso out at low angles, even if they're fairly flexible. So you often end up having to push these people fairly upright.
So does that mean like an endurance bike would be better suited?
Most of the time.
Okay.
Most of the time, yeah. That we tend to run with these guys, they almost always have really bad foot problems on the bike. Numbness, hypersensitivity, that kind of stuff, metatarsal pain because of the impaired circulation in their feet from their body type, right? So these people often end up doing really well with very rearward cleat positions. They have to have the arch support like perfect and bang on. We often end up making them a soft orthotic with a really like a what we call swan foam here in Australia cover on it, which is like a 6mm really super soft cover to basically make the top of the orthotic super soft so that their foot doesn't get irritated, because a lot of the time they have neuralgias like peripheral hypersensitivity problems from the nerves being chronically damaged and chronically having poor circulation and that sort of stuff in their feet. So a lot of the time we have to do tricky stuff with their feet. We often end up putting them on really upright positions because they can't flex forward, and a lot of the time shorter cranks because they don't like their knees coming up real high, because often their knee can't bend too deeply and their hip can't flex too deeply. Okay. So those are the on-bike solutions for them.
What about the saddle before you talk about off the bike? Because that's the one that I was thinking about.
Saddle.
Yeah. Because obviously there's a lot of weight, at times going into the saddle, and that there could be a lot of discomfort.
Yep.
So is there a perfect saddle like the Eagle behind you?
The Eagle is always a perfect saddle. Like that's always the solution to every question you ask, is just, it's like a golden eagle stooping upon its prey. That's what it looks like. So the two saddles we often recommend for ladies who've got this sort of body type are the Celitalia Donna and the Celitalia Diva. Okay. And they come in a couple of different widths, but they tend to have really soft uppers, and they just, because there's so much padding on them, they just sort of conform around the bottom of your pelvis, no matter what shape it is. And they're very, very wide in the back. For the men, the men don't tend to suffer from this. They don't struggle with this body type as much. The women tend to be much more prone to it, in my experience. But if you have got these traits, and you're a bloke, I would gravitate towards something like an SMP Light 209, which is one of the more heavily padded SMPs, or a TRK, which is one of their sort of touring/commuting style ones, which is really heavily padded and quite wide in the rear. The road one would be the Light 209. It's a really good saddle with a lot of padding for people who sit reasonably upright. And then outside of that, I find that actually the gravel style seats, you can, for example, one of the favourite ones I've got at the moment is the Celitalia Superflow in the gravel version, and it's much more heavily padded, and it's got a lot more flex in the shell, and it's a really good wide backed seat in the L3 version. So you often end up going with a really soft, squishy, comfortable seat for them, because again, the part and parcel of the metabolic dysfunction is often nerve hypersensitivity, and especially when you've got chronic insulin resistance sort of stuff going on, which a lot of them are sort of pre-diabetic or diabetic or going down that path, the nerve sensitivity in the skin becomes a big problem in their feet and on their bum, the two main contact points. They also get a lot of hand trouble as well. But if you can give them a really, really softly cushioned, smooth, like heavily padded seat that's very wide, that's often how they end up being the most comfortable. Okay. SMPs can work for them, but usually you'd be looking at things like the TRK or the Well, those sort of more heavily padded SMPs, but they don't tend to do really well with hard saddles, which is the overarching consideration for this sort of body type. Now off the bike, I often sit them down and sort of talk to them about this as I'm fitting them. The best thing you can do when you've got this type of body type is get rid of it. It's really, really not great for your general health. All the research tells us that these are the people that are most likely to develop diabetic neuropathies and cardiovascular disease, and holding all that visceral fat around your core is really, really bad. There's a huge can of worms here. And I won't delve into these things too deeply, but if you've got this body type and you're struggling to shift it, the things that I would most recommend would be firstly to follow a fairly rigid and careful circadian rhythm sleep pattern, where you wake with the sunrise and you go to bed 2 or 3 hours after sunset, and try and avoid screens after dark, because a lot of the time they've got really bad sleep patterns. They don't get a lot of REM sleep, and hence their body's stuck in like an adrenal fatigue type problem, and the sleep is part of the deal. So getting really good quality sleep, making sure that you're not looking at bright lights after dark and that sort of stuff, really, really important. If you can re-regulate your circadian rhythm, you tend to do much better. They often do really well with low carb, high fat, high protein diets, ketogenic, Atkinson diet, those sorts of things. They tend to do really, really well with that, because a lot of the time I find a lot of the reason that they're getting such storage of their around their visceral fat is that they are basically, I guess you could use the word allergic, but it's probably not the right word, but they have a lot of difficulty digesting heavily processed food, and they don't do well with it. So if you put them on a really clean diet, which is either zero carb or very low carb, they tend to do really well. Ketogenic, carnivore diets, they tend to work really well for these people. Along with that, if you can at the same time do a bit of intermittent fasting, 2 days a week is great, 3 is even better, where you have a big heavy protein meal the night before with 0 carbohydrates, and then don't eat breakfast the next morning. Just have some water or something. Try and get through to midday, get yourself into that, semi-ketotic state. It tends to help reset their metabolism, which is what they really need, is a metabolism reset, So this will help to normalize their leptin and their insulin responses. Really, really good thing to do.
You'd recommend that on a recovery day, being a cyclist?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but most of them they're not serious cyclists, because you can't be. It's very difficult to train at a really high level when you've got a lot of this excess weight around your middle. So they tend to be recreational riders, which is great. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. But if you're struggling to shift the weight, the metabolism reset is the way to go. And you're right, you probably don't want to do that on a high intensity day. Yeah. So do it on a recovery day. Maybe do a 1 hour easy ride and then fast afterwards, or just on a day where you're not riding at all. So breaking that cycle of insulin and leptin response is really, really important to reset the metabolism. Ice baths tend to work really well for them as well, for similar reasons. It seems to have a shocking sort of effect on them, pardon the pun. It shocks their metabolism into a almost a fasting sort of state. And it's really, really good to change the ratio of their yellow to white fat cell burn, which then helps to re-regulate the circulatory system and the digestive system back into better health. So ice baths work really well. Throw in some weight training is my final one. Do some weight training. Try and get a lot of, twice a week, a decent weight session in, so that you're getting not only cardiovascular training, but also resistance training. And hopefully with all of that sort of stuff, you'll be able to break the cycle of the endomorph, body type, if you like, and re-regulate your metabolism back into normality, and then life gets a lot better after that. Whether it's genetics or environmental, you can break the cycle of it. And it goes without saying, but avoid binge eating. Don't eat terrible food. Try and eat whole food that's not heavily processed. Cut down on your seed oils, all that sort of stuff. That's all the basics. But these are the other things you can do on the side.
Cool. All right. Thanks very much, Neil.
No worries.